Hello and welcome to an eye on SG diplomacy. In this episode, we will be interviewing His Excellency Mr. Allaster Cox, High Commissioner of the Commonwealth of Australia to Singapore. So, hello, His Excellency Mr. Allaster Cox, High Commissioner of Australia to Singapore. And first of all, thank you very much for this prestigious occasion.
Thank you very much, Hippolyta. You're most welcome.
So this interview will be in three parts. So first one is your journey through the diplomatic career, and also Australia-Singapore questions and their relationship.
Yep.
And lastly, general questions. So, first of all, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm very well. We've had a quite big day at the High Commission today. So I've had meetings with agencies outside the High Commission, mission staff, and been writing a speech and doing a range of tasks. So I've been very busy.
Okay, well, sounds really interesting. So to begin with our first question, what is your journey throughout the diplomatic career?
Well, I've been in the diplomatic service for a long time now, for almost 40 years, since 1987. And I was initially very interested in what's happening overseas when I was a student, even at like your age at school, and very interested in history, geography, and then because of that, I also became interested in economics as well. And so when I was a student, and then later I liked to travel. And so I put all of that together and thought, what's the sort of career I'd like to do? And initially I did do some other work with big oil company Shell, but then the opportunity arose to join the Australian Diplomatic Service, and so I did. And since then, I've really concentrated my career on the countries of Southeast Asia. I've been in Indonesia twice. I've been in Brunei Darussalam. I've been in Malaysia. Been in Vietnam, and been in a number of other countries, or worked on a number of other countries. I've spent, of that nearly 40 years, I've calculated I spent about 23 of them overseas, and the others I've spent back at the headquarters in Australia. So my journey has been one of ever deepening knowledge about Southeast Asia and its engagement with Australia and the world, and it's been through the passage of history. So when I first joined the Foreign Service, it was still the late part of the Cold War, and when rival blocs, the Soviet Union and the United States and Western allies, were locked in competition, and that moved to a sort of a post-Soviet Union era and dominated by the United States, and lots of opportunities for growth and economic and through globalization and opportunities, which was a time of real growth here in Southeast Asia, economic growth. It saw Singapore's economy grow enormously in the 1990s and thereafter, but other countries in Southeast Asia too. And then there was, the Asian financial crash of the late 90s, And then since the turn of the century, we've seen the United States still very in a dominant position in this region, but increasingly by more than 15 years ago, we've seen the enormous growth of China, and now the emergence of China's rivalry with the United States and its impact on Australia and Southeast Asia. And so through my career, I've been helping Australia policymakers to navigate those ins and outs, and it's been continuously fascinating.
Okay.
So that's my journey.
Okay. So in your journey, is there someone or something that made you want to join diplomacy?
Well, I suppose the interest in travel came from my grandparents, who were great travellers, and so I always remember, talking to my grandfather, my mother's father, and my mother's mother were great travellers, and they made a very great impression on me. And travelling the world was first impressed on me by them, and how interesting and challenging and that was. So my grandparents were quite influential with that, and my own parents, but certainly my grandparents, I think, initially. And then after that, I think I was generally inspired by understanding of great historical figures in the world. I was always very interested in international politics and international economics, and not anyone in particular, but I've always been interested in what drives people, what are the motivations, what are the interests, what are the economic, political and other interests that drive things along, and I'm always curious to know and always want to analyse, understand why things are the way they are, always never satisfied with just observing, but always interested in why things are the way they are, never stop asking questions. So nothing, not a person in particular, but back in when I was a younger child, it was definitely my grandparents that inspired me. I first got a subscription to the National Geographic in 1970. So that was like 55 years ago. I still have it today. My grandmother and grandfather gave that magazine to me 55 years ago, and I've been taking that magazine ever since.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's for 55 years. So that's a large part of my life. So yes, I'd say my grandparents were very, and I can remember Christmas, it was probably about the same time, maybe it was Christmas 1971. I remember they gave me something called Encyclopedia of the World. Oh. And I ran around their house hugging it and saying, this is what I've always wanted.
So, if you could be a high commissioner in a specific country, what would that be?
Well, I've been, a high commissioner in different countries in Southeast Asia, or an ambassador in different countries in Southeast Asia. And I've always been very interested in all of those. I don't really have a favourite country. All countries are different and interesting. But I think in many ways Singapore is an ideal country for me. I've been in big countries, I've been in small countries, I've been in medium-sized countries, but the countries that impress me the most, where I think we can get the most done, are like Singapore. Smaller countries that have limited resources, but are very driven by a need to survive and to succeed. They use their brains, they use limited resources efficiently, and they're very strategic. So I'm most impressed, as I reflect on my career, I'm most impressed by countries that are usually smaller, dynamic, using limited resources efficiently and effectively to achieve their goals. So, I like being here in Singapore, but there are other countries like it too, and some of them have gone backwards and forwards and done different things at different times. In our own region, New Zealand is our neighbour, is quite an impressive country. It's having its ups and downs now, but it's quite good often. I'm very impressed with countries in Europe like Denmark and Ireland and some of the Nordic countries like Sweden and Norway, Finland. They're all very, I think, dynamic countries. Israel is, I think, not right now, but traditionally I think Israel has always done very well. And some of the countries of the Gulf, like the UAE or Qatar. So, or even a country in Africa like Rwanda, although it has rather authoritarian leadership. But nonetheless, I think all of them exhibit, how you do things, do more with less. That's what impresses me, and that's where I like to work, because I think that's where there's lots of lessons and things that from Australia, we can share and work together with other countries. So if you ask me, if I hadn't have this posting, and if I, could be ambassador to Ireland or ambassador to New Zealand or something like that, I'd be very interested to do that. I'm more impressed by that than I am impressed by just size and power. I think you can be very large and still not use your power very effectively or efficiently or well. And I'm afraid there's a lot of examples of that in today's world.
Yes. So now to head into part 2 of the questions, we will be talking about Singapore and Australia relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2025 right now, what would you consider one of the biggest challenges in Singapore-Australia relations?
Well, there are a number of challenges, but I think both countries face a rather uncertain environment. As I just said, both of us have been both of us have been very reliant on a fairly well-defined, rules-based order internationally, underpinned by the UN Charter and systems like the WTO for trade. And a lot of these institutions that were created after World War II, after 1945, are now facing really crisis of confidence and crisis of an existential crisis. The United States was instrumental, having won World War II with Western allies, was instrumental in setting up this system, and is now pulling away from it. And the system is now lacks a leading champion. Many of us, like Singapore and Australia, I think still want to champion it, and we will work together to try to preserve the best of what we can from it. But it's challenging, and new powers have risen, like, for example, China, and now India, and other large powers, and they don't necessarily believe that the existing order and its institutions necessarily suit their interests, so they want to change it. And that might be acceptable to some extent, but there's no great clarity about how they want to do that. So I think there's a big challenge for countries like Singapore and Australia and others to try to ensure that we can somehow maintain an order that preserves our interests, our economic potential for economic growth and change, and to adapt to major challenges like climate change, for example, which is a really major and existential challenge in our world, which requires collaboration. And increasingly, we don't find that collaboration between large powers, as we saw the other day in the Conference of the Parties, COP30 in Brazil. So I think the biggest challenge for Australia and Singapore is really to work together to try to preserve the best aspects of the old order that existed from 1945 until now, and try and transition them or help them transition to a new order of stability where some of the best is preserved and some of the interests of new rising powers like China and India and Brazil and others, and then all of the medium and smaller countries, including ourselves, are taken into account. So that's the biggest challenge. I mean, we've got a lot of bilateral challenges as well. We've just agreed a new 10-year roadmap called Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Phase 2. And that includes a whole range of work areas from defence and border management to economic supply chain resilience, and the green economy transition, the movement to net zero by 2050, the growth of renewable energy, coping with the growth of managing and benefiting from new technology, the use of artificial intelligence, and strengthening our people-to-people ties. But I think within that, strengthening our defence relations in the two countries, which are very important and very deep. Critical supply chains, very important for both countries. We've, in the era of globalisation, we've built a world of just-in-time logistics planning, which means it's more efficient. We don't have to stockpile everything all the time, don't have to duplicate what everybody else does, and we can be more efficient. But increasingly, in this more uncertain world, the need for critical supply chain security to create stockpiles, to be certain that we're going to have things we need, that we're not the subject of coercion and restrictions by major powers. All of that's growing. So I think supporting each other through critical supply chains and then the green transition. Both the trade in energy is the largest trade between the two countries. Singapore has a large petroleum refinery capacity, and 25% of Australia's refined petroleum comes from Singapore. And we supply large amounts of Singapore's gas for its electricity supply. It generates electricity here. So transitioning to more renewable energy and helping, we have strong capacity to produce a large amount of renewable energy and to also store a lot of CO2. Singapore doesn't. And so helping Singapore to reach its net zero by 2050 goal is an important thing for them, and I think also for us. So yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of an overview of some of the big challenges.
So you said that there was some sort of new era in the world from 1945 to 2025, and now there's a new one.
Yeah.
How do you think Singapore and even Australia could adapt to this new era?
Well, I think it's challenging. I think we've been very fortunate to have overall a stable order after 1945, which enabled the growth of global markets and has helped to lift economic activity across the world and raise, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in countries like China or India or other countries across the developing world. And so transitioning to a new order is always challenging. And when an old order finishes, it tends to slowly fray and break apart. And the danger is that as the old order frays and breaks apart, there is the danger of conflict. And that happened in sort of period between about 1890 and 1914 in Europe, and unfortunately that ended in the First World War. And the world order was not really re-established again until after the end of the Second World War. So the First and Second World War was the culmination of an order transition that did not work. And it was a long period. It was a period of well, it probably started in the 1890s, as I said, really, and then didn't end until 1945. And the second half of it was coloured by war and a very uneasy peace in the 1920s and 30s. So that's the risk for all of us, is of a very, which we're already in now. This order transition has already well started, and you know, the administration of Donald Trump in the United States, and you know, the Xi Jinping's China are already involved in elements of rivalry and other powers as well. India, as I've mentioned, Brazil, Japan, many other, Europe, are all involved in this process. And we can see Russia and its aggression in Ukraine now, almost 4 years, more. So I think, you know, this is very, very challenging time. And I think, as I said, I think all Australia and Singapore can try to do is leverage our, you know, partnership and our partnerships with many other like-minded countries in Europe or in other parts of the world, in Asia or in other regions, to encourage great powers to behave responsibly, and to look after our own interests as best we can and protect our own interests, to avoid getting drawn into conflicts if we can, and to try to discourage behaviour that leads to conflict. For example, you know, risky behaviours by China in the South China Sea, for example, or you know, risky behaviours by you know, China towards Taiwan, or other things that could provoke, or risky behaviours by the United States. So there's, you know, there's I think both of us need to collaborate in forums that are available to us, including the UN or other big multilateral forums like the G20 or in APEC, or we have many multilateral forums. There's been a whole series of big multilateral meetings the last 2 months where we can try to encourage major powers to work more effectively together. But it's not easy, and I wouldn't want to pretend that it is. So we are in a very difficult era, and it's not going to get any easier much quicker.
Okay, so now we are going to head into the last part 3, of the questions, which are general questions.
Sure.
So first of all, what is your average day?
My average day involves usually a mixture of the following. Some external meetings with Singapore government or business people to, you know, find out what they're thinking about a variety of issues, like some of the ones I've named there, or to articulate our views about something and to explain to them what we think about something, so they're aware of that. internal meetings with my staff to set goals and targets and to review work, to oversee how the embassy or the High Commission is run, to communicate to staff various developments and to seek their collaboration and work together on various tasks. It involves some writing and reviewing the work of staff. A lot of staff here they write, reports, and they ask me to look at them. So I do a bit of that. I read them and give them comments and feedback. Sometimes it can involve work with the media, or Sophia here does work with media or cultural institutions, or other public facing units in the community. I engage with them with the help of her and her team. So usually the day, sometimes I go to functions or gatherings hosted by Singapore government or foreign organisations, foreign business or community organisations. I can support Australian businesses here, meet Australian businesses, they ask for my help, or I might give them a speech or some words or encouragement or direction. So each day is usually a mixture of two or three of those elements in different patterns each day.
So what was one of your last meetings with, for example, the Singaporean government?
Well, I met with the Singapore government yesterday, and we talked about the interests of Australian educational institutions here. There are 4 Australian universities who have a presence here, and they would like to advance some of their interests with Singapore authorities. So I went with them and represented their interests and spoke for them and spoke with them, and they spoke to the Singapore government, and I supported them. So that's representing the interests of Australian institutions here is an important part of what I do. So yeah, that was the Singapore government. Then I met with an international institution here that works on piracy at sea, by the activities and monitoring the activities of pirates and bandits who operate in the straits around here, and how to control them. So discussed that with him. That's a program that we support, a regional program. So I had a meeting with him, and then I've had some meetings with High Commission staff during the course of today as well.
Okay, so this may be a bit of a personal question, but what is one of your favorite places in Singapore?
My favourite places in Singapore? Well, I've got a few favourite places in Singapore. I really like Tiong Bahru and Tiong Bahru Market and the food stall up there. That's one of my key favourite places. I really like the Singapore Botanical Gardens, which is just across the road here. So I often go for a walk around in there. I really like Joo Chiat, over near Katong in the east of Singapore, because of the very interesting local architecture and the general feel of the place. I really quite like Kranji War Cemetery, which is up in the northwest of the island, where there's a large number of Australian service personnel memorialised, and you have a nice view on the hill there towards Malaysia. So yeah, there's just a few. I really like some interesting historical places in Singapore. Fort Canning is very interesting, which is just down, near the city there, the hill, Fort Canning Hill. Yeah, my sort of favourite place to visit for like a museum is the old Ford factory at Bukit Timah, which is very interesting about the history of Singapore's, the defeat of the British in Singapore in 1942. So yeah, a combination of these places are some of my favourite.
So, where would you say in Singapore can we really find Australian culture?
Australian culture.
Yes.
Well, I think you can certainly find it at all sorts of, I suppose there's all sorts of things. I mean, Australians, there's probably about 25,000 Australians here in Singapore. So you can find Australian culture at a gathering of the Australian-New Zealand Association, or at the Australian Chamber of Commerce. I think you find Australian culture wherever you see large groups of Australians mixing with other people. You know, Australia is a very multicultural country, and I think Australians are very engaging with the local people in Singapore. So I think the local culture, Australian culture here, is one of I think close integration with the the local community, and you see that really embodied very well at places like the Australian International School. I don't think that's not where you're at school, but I think the Australian International School, you see, the embodiment of that Australian values. I think of diversity and inclusion, and it's a very multicultural school. I mean, there's a lot of Australians there, but there's lots of people like yourself from different countries, from European countries, from Korea, from India, from all over the place. So I think the embodiment of modern Australia is really like that, and I think it's seen best at a place like AIS, which is at Lorong Chuan near Bishan or Serangoon in central Singapore, just next to the CTE. I think that's probably the best place to see the embodiment of what is modern Australia in Singapore today.
So, for our last question today, what advice would you give to the new generation or even people entering the world of diplomacy?
Well, I think it's perhaps the most interesting time of the world now for a long time, because of that order transition that I described. And it's a time of real uncertainty and risk, but I think also a time of opportunity. And so I'd say to people, leave your assumptions to the side. Don't have too many set assumptions. Keep your mind open. Look for opportunities wherever you see them. Stay engaged and adaptable. If you're interested in diplomacy, and you want to work for a government, you need to have a good understanding of what the interests of your country are. What you're seeking to advance, what your goals are. And then you need to be very flexible and adaptable in thinking about how you might advance those, and how you might communicate those using all the tools of old and new media and communications, from speech making and other forms of original sort of communication through to electronic and social media. So and other things. So you need to be conscious of new things like artificial intelligence as well, and how that will impact on what we do. But I think fundamentally it's people-to-people profession. It's about communication. It's about understanding what other countries' interests are, what they're thinking, where they're coming from, and communicating that back to your home base and communicating to them in ways they can understand what your interests are and trying to find common ground, either between two countries or between groups of countries. So it's a communications profession, and it's an analytical profession, and so I think anybody who's interested in analysis, understanding the context and the detail, and communicating that effectively should be interested in this profession. And I think, you know, it's something that can't be completely replicated by a machine or, you know, an autonomous system, a piece of artificial intelligence. It requires the subtlety of continuous adaptation, which, you know, AI, after all, is based on large language models, which are based on everything that's gone before, whereas in the world of diplomacy, you have to be able to imagine things that haven't already existed and try to bring them into existence, even though they may not have really existed. So, yeah, I think that's what I'd say if you're interested in the world of diplomacy. But it's the most interesting time to be doing that in a very long time, I think, probably since the last order transition, which, you know, it's always a bit fraught and challenging and ups and downs and difficulties, but I think a very interesting time.
Okay, so again, thanks a lot for your time today.
Great.
And this interview was great, and I hope one day maybe to see you again.
Great, thanks, Hippolyte. Well, I hope that gives you some insights and some material you can use for your work, or however you'd like to use it. You're most welcome.
So thanks a lot, and
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.